Locust Traman directs the ice spear with his hand movement. The power of water and fire strike each other. Isabel covers her eyes as the light coming out of this strike is eye-blinding. Isabel peeks a little and says this is such a big shockwave. She says it is quaking the entirety of the Espana Mountains. She says this is such an unbelievable scene. She says ice and fire are clashing with each other with a powerful burst. She says it is such a beautiful scene. King Drake keeps releasing the heavy lashes of the fire. The clash between the two powers keeps going on. Isabel notices ice energy is getting weak. She says Frey is slowly getting pushed back. She says he will lose at this rate. She thinks, what will they do now? She feels helpless. She says she cannot do anything right now. She suddenly sees a magical formation in place of Frey. She says, where is Frey? King Drake notices that the ice power is getting weaker. He says it looks like the war is over. He boasts that he finally defeated the human. He says a measly bug like him cannot beat a great Torkunda. He says this is the power of his breath. Something makes Isabel to get shocked. She sees King Drake's head getting separated from his body. Locust Traman manages to reach King Drake when he is busy attacking with fire breath. He cuts his head off his shoulders with the help of a sharp ice spear. The lifeless head and body of King Drake move in the air. The blood spills out of them. Then, the body and head of King Drake fall to the ground with a loud sound. Isabel says the way he instantly moves behind Torkunda. She says it is unbelievable that he killed thousands of year-old monsters. She says on top of that, he killed it when he was not in perfect form. She wonders just how powerful Locust Traman would be in his prime form. She sees him collapsing. She instantly flies close to him and holds him in the middle of the air. She asks him if he is all right. She says he is so cold. She feels his whole body is frozen cold. He calls out the name of the phoenix even in this state of being. He asks her to take him to the phoenix. She tells him that he is incredible. She compliments him for defeating King Drake easily. Locust Traman says King Drake was lacking in battle experience even though he was thousands of years old. He says slaughtering humans and fighting are two different things. He asks her to keep this thing in mind. He says one needs strength and tactics while fighting against a powerful opponent. He tells her that he made him think that he was going to make a decisive attack with all his strength. He says, but in reality, he used 80% of his mana to create the ice spear. He tells her that he used the rest of the 20% mana to reach behind King Drake and to make an ice scythe. Isabel says it is very insightful that he used 80% mana to create an ice spear. They reach close to the phoenix. Locust Traman looks at the phoenix. Isabel cries and says it has already breathed its last. Locust Traman puts his hand on the dead body of the phoenix and says he has saved his life. He raises the dead body of Phoenix in the air. Isabel asks him what he is doing. He replies he will revive it. He takes the dead body of the phoenix close to the dead body of King Drake. Isabel sees the fire energy of Torkunda's heart being absorbed by the phoenix's body. Locust Traman says as a phoenix, he must revive with this much energy. He says now that Torkunda is dead, there must be a battle among all the drakes of the Espana Mountains. He says they will fight to choose who will reign over these mountains next. He pats the body of the phoenix and thinks he should rule over there now. He asks him to become the ruler of the mountains so that his friend's dungeon does not get defiled by a second or third Torkunds. He says he will leave it in charge of the dungeon. He says he will wait till they meet again. The scene shifts to K-Symphony, where there are many people around. Locust Traman sits beside the road. He sits silently and seems to be absorbed in some thought. He looks different. His gray hair turns white. He has tied his hair, unlike the previous times. Isabel comes close to him and tells him that she has reserved a ship for them. She says, as they expect, there is no departing today. He says she has done a nice job. She offers him Carpenpark Joyce. He takes the juice and starts to drink it. She asks him how he is feeling now. He replies he is fine. He adds he needs to put on some weight. Isabel says the equipment they recovered from Torkunda's nest seems to be having an effect. She adds that the powerful salamander fire attribute cloak made by Schweizer appears to stabilize the frozen river's cold energy. Locust Traman says this is true. She asks him if there is a need to take all the items from the next. She says the spatial strong bag is all full. They look at the bag, which is quite full. Locust Traman says these things may be useless, but he cannot let his friend's things rot in such a place. They start to finish Carpenpark juice. Isabel says now if she thinks the new semester is almost there. She says this is such a long vacation. She says it feels like a few years have passed. Locust Traman says they were in the Espana Mountains for a week. Isabel asks him what he thinks about going to Lord Peruan's house. He repeats the name and starts to think about that. Isabel says it is in this area. She adds they have to spend this day either way since there is no ship for today. Locust Traman says this is true. They reach the mansion of Jun House. 2 armed guards stand outside the gate. They say wow to see the mansion of Jun House. The guard asks them to state their business. Locust Traman asks the guard if Peruan Jun is there. The guard asks him who he is. He replies he is a friend. The guard asks him what his name is. Locust Traman says oh. The guard thinks he is such an insolent brat. He smiles and says he is Frey Blake. The guard remembers that Lord Peruan Jun told him that his friend named Frey Blake may visit the house during vacation. He also told the guard that his friend is the 3rd son of Bleak House. Lord Peruan Jun ordered him to treat his friend the same way they treated him. They ordered them to treat his friend with utmost respect. Locust Traman says the little brat Peruan Jun is quite a rich man. He thinks it appears he is the young master's only friend. Meanwhile, a cartridge reaches the gate. The guard says the young lady has returned. Isabel and Locust Traman look at the cartridge. The door of the cartridge opens and a young lady comes out of the cartridge. She asks the guards what is the matter. The guards get active to see Lady Lilia. The guard tells Lady Lilia that a man saying he is a friend of Lord Peruan Jun has come. Lady Lilia looks at the boy and asks if his brother's friend has come. She says all right. She smiles and looks at him. She thinks he must be Sir Frey Blake. She asks him if he is Frey Blake. She says she has heard a lot about him from her brother. She looks at Isabel and thinks she must be Isabel. She asks her if she is Isabel. Isabel asks her who she is. She tells Isabel that she is Peruan's little sister Lilia. She asks them to get in the cartridge. She says she will take them to the mansion. Isabel and Locust Traman look at Lady Lilia. Isabel says Lady Lilia is so gorgeous. She says she is a female and her beauty has taken away her breath. The guard comes close to Lady Lilia and asks why she has not revealed his identity yet. Lady Lilia looks to the guard. The guard understands Lady Lilia's gesture. The guard apologizes for the discourtesy. The guard salutes them. The cartridge starts to move toward the mansion. Locust Traman thinks he still does not see the main building, even though they got past the gate long ago. He thinks about how large the state is. He looks outside the window. Lady Lilia looks at Locust Traman. Locust Traman asks Lady Lilia what she has been staring at since the beginning. He asks her if there is something that she wishes to say. She says he is a long different from the person that his brother has explained to her. She says his hair is white instead of ashen gray, which she has heard of. Locust Traman touches his hair and says a lot has happened during the journey. Lady Lilia asks him to speak freely. She says he is the friend of her brother and son of the Bleak House. She smiles after saying this. Locust Traman says, all right, let's do that. Lady Lilia smiles again. Locust Traman says she is the one who should say it first. Isabel asks him to stay quiet. Lady Lilia says she heard that he has been attending the same Westrod Academy as her brother. She asks him how her brother is at the academy. He replies he has no idea about it. He says Peruan is 2 years senior to him in the academy, so they do not meet so often. Lady Lilia thinks he is 2 years younger than her brother, so he would not be too older than her. Lady Lilia wondered if her brother really made him a friend. Isabel addresses Locust Traman. He asks her what is the matter. She says this is Jun House, so pay more respect. She also asks him to watch his mouth. The scene shifts to the Jun mansion. The mansion has been built luxuriously. It has a spacious garden in front of the main door. There are divided water ponds in the garden. There is a beautiful fountain in the middle of the garden. They enter the mansion. They reach near the fountain and stop there. They see Peruan Jun in front of them. Peruan Jun is overjoyed to see his friends and welcomes them with an open heart. Peruan Jun says he is late. He says he has been waiting for him. Peruan asks him if he has finished his business. He replies at most. Peruan asks him how the color of his hair changed. Locust Traman replies he tried to change his style. He adds he is exhausted and starving. Peruan Jun says he can see even if he does not say. Persua winks while talking to his friend. Lady Lilia sees her brother smiling. She says she has never seen her brother smiling so happy. She comes forward and says to her brother he has not cared much about her. Peruan says no, this is not true. He says there is no way that he can ignore his little princess. Locust Traman asks her how about the party princess. He asks if she has forgotten that he reached a moment ago. Lady Lilia goes inside and says forget about the party. Peruan Jun calls her. From behind, Peruan Jun says this is bad. He says his sister always gets mad and the reason is always a mystery. Locust Traman says in his opinion he is calling his sister a princess without any hesitation, and it is more of a mystery. Peruan Jun says in any case he does not think that his destination in the mountains of hell. Locust Traman asks him how he knows that. He asks him if he told him earlier about that. Peruan Jun asks him if he saved his fiancée in the mountains. They walk in the corridor. Locust Traman tries to remember something. Isabel says he must be talking about Lady Sonia Aqua Reed. He says oh Sonia Aqua Reed. He adds he must have reached safely. Peruan Jun tells him that she is still practicing her sword skills relentlessly. He says she is incredibly hardworking. He says no wonder she has received the title of a rainstorm at the age of 14. Locust Traman laughs and says to Peruan Jun that she is wasted on him. Peruan Jun asks him what he says. Locust Traman asks him where they are headed right now. Peruan Jun says there is a family rule that every guest says greetings to the family head first. He says he will take him to his father. They reached a door and entered another chamber. They join the Jun family at the dining table. All the members of Jun's family are sitting here. A maid serves food to everyone. Jun's father says he is pleased to meet him. He asks him how Count Bleak is these days. Locust Traman says that his father is doing well. Isabel seems quite impressed by the father of Peruan's father. She says he has such an aura. Locust Traman feels dumb while talking about the family of Frey Blake. He thinks he has just borrowed Frey's body, but he has never met his father. Jun's family's head, Mr. Shepherd, looks like a hard person. He is one of the 7-star magicians of the Empire and head of the 4th Magic Tower. Locust Traman thinks he might have some information about the demigod. Mr. Shepherd Jun says the 6th Magic Tower is quite far from here, so he only meets with the Count a year during the Magic Tower's conference. Mr. Shepherd Jun says he missed the enjoyable and worthwhile time that he has spent with him. Locust Traman says he understands this. He looks at Mr. Shepherd's face and notices there is a tattoo. He says he is sure that Mr. Shepherd Jun's tattoo is Schweizer's magic tattoo. Mr. Shepherd Jun says to Locust Traman that he saved not only his son but also his fiancée. He says to Locust Traman to allow him to show his gratitude. Locust Traman says he is unworthy of it. Mr. Shepherd Jun asks him for what business he has visited the mountains. Locust Traman seems reluctant to answer this question. He says he has some personal business to attend to. Isabel looks at him for such a reply. Mr. Shepherd Jun asks him what sort of business he had there. His visit to the mountains is an odd thing for Mr. Shepherd Jun. Locust Traman says the mountains are such a trivial thing that is undeserving of his attention. Mr. Shepherd Jun laughs and says, "Is that so?" Mr. Shepherd Jun addresses Peruan and asks how the preparations are going for the banquet. Peruan Jun says everything is going on as per the schedule. Mr. Shepherd Jun tells him that many important guests will attend this banquet. He asks Peruan to supervise it as a personal practice for the future. Peruan says he understands. Peruan Jun asks Frey to do something. But before he completes his sentence, Mr. Shepherd Jun intrudes. He says there is a magic that he has been searching for recently. He says he wants to ask his opinion on this magic. Locust Traman says he does not know if he can be of help with his abilities. Mr. Shepherd Jun says there is no need to feel pressured. Peruan Jun sits as if he does not know what to say about this. Mr. Shepherd Jun says he needs new ideas and points of view. He says he needs his opinion as a young man of the current generation. Peruan Jun stands up and says he will wait for him in the banquet hall. Locust Traman says good luck to him. Locust Traman asks Isabel to go and help Peruan instead of him. Isabel says he understands his point. He leaves him alone with Mr. Shepherd Jun as other members of the family also disperse. After everyone goes, Mr. Shepherd Jun addresses Frey Blake and asks him to reveal his true intention. Mr. Trina Shepherd Jun asks him what he is scheming. Locust Traman looks at Mr. Abel Shepherd Jun and stays quiet for a while, as if trying to figure out from where he should start the conversation. Locust Traman thinks about Traman rings. He says to Mr. Cool Shepherd Jun that he is misunderstanding something. Mr. Tall Shepherd Jun says it is cunning of him to use Peruan Jun. He asks him if he already knows that he will be present at home these days. Mr. Shepherd says to him that he is quite arrogant. He says he is wearing those in front of him as nothing. Locust Traman asks him about what he is talking about. Mr. Tuna Shepherd Jun says he is talking about typhoon earrings. Locust Traman touches his earring and says oh, he is talking about that. He stays quiet for a moment to think what he should say now. He thinks if there is no Traman Ring Club that Peruan Jun runs in the academy. He replies to Mr. Shepherd Jun that he needs help understanding what he is talking about. He says he obtained these earrings from the Espana Mountains. Mr. Shepherd Jun asks him if he is not a part of Traman Rings. He replies that Peruan invited him to join the club, but he refused. He adds he does not like being chained up with a group. Mr. Shepherd Jun stands up and says he is not talking about the club that Peruan is leading in the academy. He says he is talking about something else. He leaves his talk in between and changes the topic. He asks Locust Traman if he is just a wanderer. Mr. Shepherd Jun holds his head and says he misunderstood something. He says he may let down his guards. Locust Traman says he will if the Majesty does it first. Mr. Shepherd Jun says he is a proud one. Mr. Shepherd Jun asks him just where he thinks he is right now. Locust Traman answers at his friend's house. Mr. Shepherd Jun looks at him with suspicion. Locust Traman judges his gesture and says he is here to visit his friend. The scene shifts to the banquet. Peruan Jun and Isabel check out the arrangements for the banquet. One of the servants looks at Lord Peruan Jun and says he has no announcement to meet him there. Isabel and Peruan Jun work with the servants for the preparations. The scene shifts back to the dining hall. Mr. Shepherd Jun says to a Locust Traman that he does not fully trust him now, but he will try to change his opinion about him. He joins his hands as a gesture of thinking about something. Then he tells Locust Traman that he wants him to tell his background. He says he will consider him one of them as long as he wears these earrings. Mr. Shepherd Jun asks him who the continent's master is according to him. Locust Traman thinks for a moment before saying anything. Mr. Shepherd Jun, among the nations founded by humans, the caste cow is the greatest empire. He adds that it is just the 1/10 size of the whole continent. Locust Traman looks down and says this is right. Mr. Shepherd Jun adds that if intelligent creatures' power is gauged to the 10 fingers, the power of humans would only be 3 fingers. He says it would be difficult for them to call the master of this continent with this much. Mr. Shepherd Jun looks down and says there is another master, the true master. He says he is a transcendent being who controls the world from the shadows. Locust Traman clenches his fists to hear this. Mr. Shepherd Jun again repeats that there is another master, the true master. Mr. Shepherd Jun looks at the response of the boy sitting before him and says that master is the demigod. Locust Traman looks at the face of Mr. Shepherd Jun. Mr. Shepherd Jun continues by saying that the demigod is a semi-divine existence that transcends humanity. He adds that the demigods are the actual predators that control the human society. Mr. Shepherd Jun says this may sound like a foolish conspiracy theory for a young man like him. He adds that there are such beings behind the scenes. Locust Traman smiles to hear the words. Mr. Shepherd Jun asks him why he is smiling. Locust Traman thinks there were only 5 of them. He thinks there were 5 of them who put their lives on the line to oppose demigods. He says 4,000 years have passed. He says he believes that the demigods have retaken control of the whole world. He thinks the people living have no idea about this world's laws and rules. He says to himself that to believe that there are still people who share their mindset and are increasing in number is something like hope. Mr. Shepherd Jun notices him busy in a deep thought. He asks Frey if something is wrong. Locust Traman seems entirely absorbed in his thoughts. He thinks some people saw the existence of the demigods. He believes they are the fighters who are yet to surrender. He says these people are hiding in every corner of the world, waiting for the opportune moment. Mr. Shepherd Jun again asks him why he is smiling. Locust Traman repeats the words, "Why is he smiling?" He asks why he should not be smiling. He says for the first time after returning to the world, he has seen the light of hope. Mr. Shepherd Jun notices his silence and asks him another question. He asks him if he has a prior knowledge of demigods. Locust Traman replies he knows a little about it. Mr. Shepherd Jun asks him how he knows about the demigods. Locust Traman takes a heavy breath and asks himself to stay calm. He thinks Mr. Shepherd Jun may be an ally. Then he rejects that thought. Locust Traman says he must not reveal his true identity to this man because he is his ally. He touches his earrings. He tells Mr. Shepherd Jun that he had read Schweizer's notes when he obtained these earrings. Mr. Shepherd Jun stands up and asks if he read Schweizer's notes. Locust Traman keeps sitting calmly. Mr. Shepherd Jun closes his eyes and thinks the boy wants him to reveal what he knows about this. Mr. Shepherd Jun tries to calm himself down. He says they need more information about the demigods. He says they need to find out how many demigods are there. He adds they are still determining if they exist. Mr. Shepherd Jun says the goals of the demigods have yet to be discovered. He says they have yet to discover why they keep acting behind the scenes without showing themselves. Mr. Shepherd Jun says there is one thing that he is sure of. He adds he believes that they are powerful enough to wipe out every single species of the face of the world on a whim and still have strength remaining in them. He says they have observed their attempts to do so in history. Locust Traman says Mr. Shepherd Jun knew the main stuff, which is a relief. He thinks he believes that they are few. He says there must be over 100 of them. He considers each one of them to be similar to the gods. Then he rejects that thought. Mr. Shepherd Jun continues the conversation and says that 5 heroes fought against the demigods 4,000 years ago. He adds that all of them are famous people. He says he must have heard about them. He says they are the following: Great Sage Schweizer, Magic Warrior King Cassigen, Blade King Lucid, Black Witch Iris, and the Great Mage Locust Traman. He adds that after the Great Mage Locust Traman vanished, the history changed. He says a rift split the Great Magic Warrior King Cassigen and the Blade King Lucid. He says the Black Witch removed all traces of her. Mr. Shepherd Jun adds that the Great Sage Schweizer was the only one fighting until the end. He says, but he cannot face the demigods on his own. He says with that, the names of these people become history. There is deep silence in the dining hall. Locust Traman says, like the Schweizer's diary, he knows the events that are not recorded in history. He thinks he can trust him. Mr. Shepherd Jun says their circle is an organization that has inherited their will. Locust Traman asks him what sort of circle. Mr. Shepherd Jun says there is only one circle if he generalizes it. He adds that this circle is divided into the whole continent. He says the will they inherited as time passed split into different groups. He says now they are in a time when each of them keeps in check on the others. Locust Traman says it always turns political when 2 or more people are involved. He releases a heavy breath. Mr. Shepherd Jun says they are divided into many circles. He says Straw Necklace, Fistfounder Armelts, and Lucid Swords are the most influential ones. He adds these 3 circles are famous ones. Locust Traman says that these circles are named after them. He thinks about him and King Cassigen. Mr. Shepherd Jun says he only knows a little about other circles. He adds that he learned that Traman Rings's situation is not very good. He adds that this circle's leader apparently has died and the members have joined other circles. Locust Traman feels terrible to hear this. He says this is so fucking political. He asks Mr. Shepherd Jun about the circle of Magic Warrior King Cassigen's successors. Mr. Shepherd Jun tells him that the title of King Cassigen is passed down to one person at a time, but he needs to know the whereabouts of this group. Locust Traman asks him if the club at the academy is related to the circle, as they share the same name. Mr. Pine Shepherd Jun says the students run the club on their whim. He says they bring some geniuses into their circle when they find some geniuses in the academy. He says the students need to learn about the circle. He pours wine in the glasses. He says according to their point of view, there should be different organizations with the same name as their circles. They are better hidden and less unlikely to get caught. He turns back and says they never know when the ear of the demigod reaches them. Mr. Shepherd Jun offers him a glass of wine. Locust Traman thinks, what if the conversation reaches the demigod's ear? Mr. Shepherd Jun says that is why he tested them when he got there. He says it was necessary as he came to him with a clear belonging to Locust, the Typhoon Earrings. He says the Typhoon Earrings made him think he is a Traman Rings member. He says he thought he came here to challenge a war with them. Mr. Shepherd Jun says this is everything he can tell him right now. He says now is his time to speak. He looks at Locust Traman and asks how he got these Typhoon Earrings. He says he told him earlier that he got them from the Ospania Mountains. He says he has heard that the relics of the heroes are still there in the mountains. He adds many people have challenged these mountains, but a few have returned. He says, however, none of them achieved anything. Locust Traman thinks he believes that most of them are obtained. He thinks most of them probably have no idea where the dungeon is. He further thinks even if they reach the dungeon, they did not know that the Torkunda must be waiting for them outside the dungeon. He tells Mr. Shepherd Jun that he was lucky. He says he ran to an unknown place and happened to find Schweizer's dungeon. Mr. Shepherd Jun is shocked to hear about Schweizer's dungeon. Mr. Shepherd Jun asks if he found Schweizer's diary. Locust Traman says yes, he discovered that diary there. He says the diary's content is the same as he told him earlier. Mr. Shepherd Jun asks him to tell him where the dungeon is and how he can reach it. Locust Traman asks for an apology. He says he went there accidentally. Mr. Shepherd Jun says, "Is that so?" He says, honestly speaking, he still cannot erase the suspicion about him. Mr. Shepherd Jun says if he does not mind, he wants to see the effect of the typhoon earrings. Locust Traman places the empty glass on the table. The typhoon earrings shine brightly. He jumps up and creates the magic aura via typhoon earrings. After showing the magical aura, he asks Mr. Shepherd Jun how the aura is. Mr. Shepherd Jun says this is not the worst possible situation. He tells him that he is not suspicious of him just because he considers him a member of Traman Rings. He adds there is a more significant reason than that. The scene shifts to the banquet. There were so many people there at the banquet, enjoying and chatting. Locust Traman seems mentally absent from the place. He is busy, is a deep thought. He thinks he has finally found someone he knows something about, the demigod. He says, but things are getting more complicated now. He takes a sip of juice and thinks things are fine since the circles inherited their will. He says that knowing that the circles are fighting each other is terrible. He says he needs to find out more details about the circles. He says, in addition, he needs to learn about the control of the frozen river's energy and to complete S.C. Weiser's Golem Anastasia. He gets frustrated and holds his head. He says there are so many things to worry about. Isabel looks at him. She thinks it might not be a coincidence that she has synchronized with Frey. She comes close to Locust Traman and asks him what he is thinking about so deeply. He looks at her. She asks him what the dress looks like. She tells him Lady Lilia has specially prepared it for her. Locust Traman says it must be so nice for her to live without worries. Isabel asks her what does that mean. Locust Traman ignores her question and gets absorbed in thinking again. He remembers his recent conversation with Mr. Shepherd Jun. He asked Mr. Shepherd Jun what the greater reason was to suspect him. Mr. Shepherd Jun told him that a month ago he had heard a report during the Magic Tower conference that someone had gotten in touch with the demigod. Locust Traman asked him about that man. Mr. Shepherd Jun looked at him and told him the man was his father, Asaka Bleak. Mr. Shepherd Jun's words made him silent. As people chatted, one of the men said that Lord Patrick's sword skilling was comparable to the knights of the Luinoble Kingdom. Lord Patrick laughs and says he should be able to do this if he has training. He asks the man if his name is Gusper. Lord Patrick invites the man to their dearesty's house's banquet next time. Gusper says it is an honor for him. Guspar thinks Lord Patrick is such an easy man to manipulate. He says he acts all high and mighty when he slightly praises him. He says Lord Patrick is such a simpleton. Guspar laughs and says thanks to Lord Patrick's stupidity, he gets invited to the Dearsty House's banquet. Guspar takes sips of a drink and checks out beautiful ladies. He says there are so many beautiful chicks at the party. He looks around and finds that Frey Blake is also at the party. He says he finally found Frey Blake. Meanwhile, Sonia Aqua Reed enters the party. Isabel and Locust Traman look at her. Sonia Aqua Reed comes towards them. Isabel asks her how has she been. Sonia asks Isabel how she has been. Locust Traman stares at Sonia Aqua Reed. She asks him if something is wrong. Locust Traman looks at Isabel and says to her that this is what true beauty looks like. Isabel makes a bad face. She asks him why he is so mean to him. Locust Traman says it was an objective judgment. Sonia Aqua Reed feels shy to hear the praise. Isabel asks Locust Traman in what way it was an accurate judgment. Isabel gets mad at him. Locust Traman asks Sonia Aqua Reed if she wants to say something. She says no. He asks her if she feels thirsty. He asks her if she would like to have his drink. He says he has taken one sip only. Isabel feels bad. She says he is so dense. Gusper comes toward them and asks if it is Frey Blake. Sonis Aqua Reed and Locust Traman look at him. Gusper says he never thought he would see Frey Blake in this place. Isabel asks Locust Traman if he knows that man. He looks at the man and states that maybe Frey knows that man. Locust Traman makes a thinking gesture. He thinks he is someone whom Frey knows. Goosebar says it is such a surprise to think that the trash of Bleak House is there. Goosebar smiles evilly. Locust Traman says there is no need to check his memory. He is just a dick. Goosebar says no matter how trashy he is, he reached Jun House's banquet using connections. He wonders if he knows how hard it is for an aristocrat like him to get an invitation to the banquet. He says to Frey Blake that he does not belong here. He adds it is a party organized by Peru and Jun, the pinnacle of all social circles. He says this place is a battlefield for the nobles to come and exchange information with each other. He says it is nice to be a part of a good family. Goosebar says to Frey Blake that he managed to get into Westrod Academy using the connection. He says he cannot even get into that academy. Locust Traman asks Goosebar to get lost. He looks at him in anger and says he does not repeat himself. He again asks him to get lost. Isabel holds his arm and says he already repeated himself. Goosebar asks Frey if he is out of his mind. Sonia Aqua Reed asks Goosebar if he is close to Frey. He replies he is very close to him. He says this dude is only capable of talking back to him, sometimes if he thinks about the previous times. Goosebar thinks, who are these two beautiful ladies? He says he knows that the parties organized by Peru and Jun have pretty women. He says, but these two stand out among the lovely ladies. He wonders why these two gorgeous chicks are with trash like Frey Blake. Goosebar thinks Frey is trying to look hard in front of these two pretty ladies. Lord Patrick comes to this side and asks Goosebar if something matters. Goosebar looks back and says, oh, Sir Patrick is there. Lord Patrick bows before Sonia Aqua Reed and says he is the eldest son of the Dearsty house. He asks her if he can have the honor of hearing her name. Sonia Aqua Reed clears her throat. Goosebar calls Lord Patrick a bastard. He thinks he is using him as a pretense to woo the woman he is aiming at just because he has praised him a little. Sonia introduces herself and says she is Sonia Aqua Reed. Goosebar thinks she does not know what kind of man Frey is since she is from a foreign country. Locust Traman says to Sonia Aqua Reed that she is pretty popular. Goosebar thinks it is an excellent opportunity. He says he will humiliate Frey for once and for all. Goosebar pushes Lord Patrick aside and addresses Sonia Aqua Reed. He says she must be the Aqua Reed house's eldest daughter who received the Rainstrom title. He says he apologized for not recognizing Lord Peruin Jun's fiancée. Sonia Aqua Reed looks at Frey and says it is still being determined. Locust Traman asks why she is telling him this. Isabel says this is so freaking dense. Gaspar says he is amazed by her consideration of welcoming every guest as the organizer's fiancé. He tells Sonia Aqua Reed that Frey Blake is not worthy of her attention and respect. Sonia and Isabel look at Goosebar in anger. Lord Patrick says he is the infamous Frey Blake. He addresses Frey Blake and says he knows his siblings well. He says his brothers Mischiel and Hines are magicians in the Magic Tower. He adds that Lord Mischiel has recently become the floor master in the tower. Locust Traman asks, so what can he do in this regard? He asks Frey Blake if it is right that Count Isaka Blake banishes him. Lord Patrick says he can fully understand him. Lord Patrick says he cannot believe he is of the same blood running through his veins as those incredible people. Isabel gets mad at him and says he is going too far. She says she does not know who he is. She says no one in the party can even reach Frey's ankle regarding skills. She clenches his fists. She asks him to apologize to Frey. Locust Traman says it is okay. He tries to calm her down. Lord Patrick asks if he should apologize to Frey. He says to her she must be joking. Lord Patrick says if someone needs to apologize, it is the one who invited this unworthy man to the prestigious party. He asks just who in the world invited a person like him. Lord Patrick, his brothers, and Goosebar laugh at Frey. Lord Peruin arrives there and asks Lord Patrick if he has offended him. They seem shocked to see Lord Peruin Jun. He says the one who invited Frey is he. Goosebar asks if Lord Peruin invited him. Lord Peruin Jun asks them if they are not expecting him there. He comes close to Lord Patrick and asks if he has offended him. Lord Peruin Jun says he did not know he had Dearsty House's permission to invite his friend. Lord Patrick stammers. He says this is not the case. He clarified that he did not mean that. Lord Peruin Jun says it has slipped from his mind since he organized the party under his name. Lord Patrick says this is not the case. Lord Peruin Jun says he will add that to his apology. He tells Lord Patrick that Frey Blake is the most valuable guest among all the people at the party. He touches the cheek of Lord Patrick. Lord Patrick asks forgiveness from Lord Paryuan-jun. Lord Paryuan-jun tells him there is no need to get nervous. He asks them to enjoy the party. He says this place is his house, and they are guests there. Then Lord Paryuan-jun comes toward Guspar. He holds Guspar by the shoulders. Gopper sweats with fear. Lord Paryuan-jun says in his ear that if they were not at their house, they would rather be dead by now. All the bullies ran and said they apologized for the disturbance. Lord Paryuan-jun waves them. Locust Traman leans towards him and says he is much more vicious than he thought. Lord Paryuan-jun smiles and says he was just imitating him. Locust Traman asks him if he is kidding. He says he is super gentle and kind. Lord Paryuan-jun asks him if he ever used the thing called the mirror. Locust Traman says his reflection is so bright and shiny that he cannot stare in the mirror. Lord Paryuan-jun asks him if he is getting bald. Isabel and Sonia Aqua Reed laugh at their conversation. Lord Paryuan-jun says to Locust Traman that he is an extraordinary man. Locust Traman looks at him. Lord Paryuan-jun says the strength he showed back in the Corteso people knew that no one would call him the trash of the Bleak family. Locust Traman says a man should not go around and show off his strength. He says it will only become troublesome for him. Lord Paryuan-jun laughs at this. He asks him what he talked about with his father. Locust Traman says his father was suspicious of him, that he is part of Traman Rings. Lord Paryuan-jun looks at him. He takes a sip of juice and asks him if he intends to join the Traman Rings Club. Locust Traman says he has no such intention. Isabel and Sonia Aqua Reed seem busy chatting. Locust Traman thinks about his conversation with Mr. Shepherd-jun. Mr. Shepherd-jun says he cleared his suspicion about him because he can utilize the typhoon earrings. He says there is someone who guarantees his identity to him. Locust Traman asks him who is that person. Mr. Shepherd-jun says that person is Heinz Bleak. Mr. Shepherd-jun tells him that Heinz Bleak is also a member of Straw Necklace like him. Mr. Shepherd-jun says he knew what his family did to him. Mr. Shepherd-jun says he must have received countless wounds and scars. Mr. Shepherd-jun says he is not in a position to say this. He says if he allows him to say what he wants, Heinz Bleak is different. He is not like Asaka Bleak and Michiel Bleak. Mr. Shepherd-jun tells him that he has agreed to his banishment for another reason. Mr. Shepherd-jun says he wants to be aware of one thing for now. Locust Traman comes back to the present moment. He tells Paryuan-jun he is not planning to return to the academy. Isabel hears this and looks at Locust Traman. Paryuan-jun asks him if he is serious. Locust Traman says there is no reason to return to the academy. Isabel looks sad to hear this. She looks again and again at Locust Traman. She says if Frey does not return to the academy, what is she supposed to do? Lord Paryuan-jun asks him what he plans to do from now onwards. Locust Traman says he does not know. He tells him that the Duke suggested he join the third magic tower. Paryuan-jun says the third magic tower is good. He puts the glass on the table and says the training curriculum is standard. He adds that the library of that place is quite good. He says the quality of magic books is good over there. Sonia Aqua Reed notices that Isabel is disturbed. She asks her if anything is wrong. Isabel says she apologizes, but she will leave now. The night prevails outside the mansion. Isabel roams about in the mansion. She is in a state of restlessness. She looks sad and says that Locust Traman will leave for the magic tower once it is tomorrow while she goes to the academy. She says they will go on separate paths. She says she knows this day will come soon since she discovered that he is Locust Traman. She puts her hand on her heart and says that she does not what she is aiming at from now on. She says she does not know what is her goal in life. She says she does not know what to learn to become a mage. The scene shifts to Lord Paryuan-jun's room. Lord Paryuan-jun asks Locust Traman if he is leaving tomorrow. Locust Traman says he had a lot of fun. He adds the banquet was incredible. He says the fame and prestige of the Paryuan name are pretty impressive. He says he must be the genius of the century born in the Jun house. Lord Paryuan-jun says it might be true. Lord Paryuan-jun says he was only 5 years old when he first sensed mana. He offers cake and tea to his friend. Locust Traman asks him if he is showing off. Lord Paryuan-jun sits on the chair lying in front of him. Lord Paryuan-jun laughs and says he is not showing off. Locust Traman says sensing mana at the age of 5 years is impressive. He thinks even he and Schweizer first felt mana at 7. Locust Traman looks at Lord Paryuan-jun and says the boy is a genius. Lord Peryuan-jun tells him that he reached the stage of 4-star at 17. He tells Locust Traman that they have mentioned in the official records that he was 20. Locust Traman asks him why. Lord Peryuan-jun says that he has never shared his feelings with anyone. He says he is sharing his things with him for the first time. He says he thinks his talent is a curse. They look at each other. They stay silent for a while. Lord Peryuan-jun tells him that he once had an instructor. He tells him that the instructor was a 6-star magician and the vice master of the 5th magic tower. He adds the instructor was a knowledgeable man with a white beard that reached his chest. Lord Peryuan-jun says whenever he asked him a question, the instructor answered his question with a kind smile and used to pat his head with love. He says he used to love his teaching method. He says he started to study even harder to ask more questions. He says he is the man who sprouted his will to learn magic. He says at least that was what he thought. Lord Peryuan-jun stays silent for a while. Then he says it was only a short time after he became Star 4. He says one day he asked him a question to his master that he could not answer. He says his instructor was quite bewildered. He says his instructor shouted at him and called him a monster. He says he was utterly enraged. He says enraged would not be a correct expression. He adds the instructor was scared. He says the instructor saw him developing his skills with a fast speed. He says the master was hiding ominous and sinister feelings in his heart. He says after that day, he lost his path and goal of life. Lord Peryuan-jun says he still enjoys studying magic. He adds whenever he fully immerses himself in something, whenever something reaches the depth of his heart, that face resurfaces like a curse. He says that the curse stops him from advancing. Lord Peryuan-jun says he curses his talent thousands of times every day. He cries bitterly and says if he were an ordinary boy, he would have learned magic more passionately. He says he would have enjoyed learning magic. He says he would not have been called a monster by anyone. Locust Traman puts a hand on his shoulder and tries to console him. He asks him to stop crying. Lord Peryuan-jun looks at him with his eyes full of tears. Locust Traman puts a hand on his shoulder. He calls him a punk and asks him to stop being cheeky. Lord Peryuan-jun looks at him. Locust Traman asks him to listen to him carefully. He says there is a state of people with fantastic abilities who cannot even be labeled as geniuses since it is degrading and cannot reach them. He says even if they work tirelessly while vomiting blood till their demise, they will never get it. He says that is the pinnacle of magic. He says he will never reach the pinnacle if he gets unmotivated because he met an unqualified instructor and was the target of his jealousy. Lord Peryuan-jun looks at him and calls him. Locust Traman says he will assure him by the time he meets again. He says he will have reached a stage higher than his current stage. Lord Peryuan-jun says he is curious to know if he is confident or conceited. Locust Traman says he is asking him to do the same. He says to Lord Peryuan-jun that he is so well aware of the existence of demigods as he thought. He moves toward the window. He looks outside the window and says the demigod is a despicable god who controls all the intelligent beings in the world. He says he is the one who changed the laws and rules of the world. Locust Traman says it is humanity's fault for not being aware that they live under tyrannical rule. He says humanity still has the potential to defeat him. He thinks they can rectify the world if they do not give up. He says that is the task that humanity can achieve. Locust Traman tells Lord Peryuan-jun that if his goal is to live an extravagant life at the Magic Tower and he wants to show off his power, his current skill is more than enough. He looks at Lord Peryuan-jun if his unique objective is to defeat the demigod. The pinnacle of magic should be his life goal. He says his goal is the latter one. He asks Lord Peryuan-jun what will be his goal. Lord Peryuan-jun stays silent for a while. Then he releases a heavy breath. He laughs and says the teacher is not the only person who can show on the right path. He asks if he is asking to go against his family and find his path by himself. Locust Traman asks him not to worry. He says he will be one step ahead of him. He puts his hand on Lord Peryuan-jun's shoulder and tries to console him. Lord Peryuan-jun calls Frey and says the day they meet again, he will be the one who will be ahead of him. Locust Traman looks at him and says that is the attitude a friend should have. The scene shifts to Isabel, who cries badly. The following day comes. Locust Traman takes his bag and looks outside. He says it is a perfect day to start a journey. Isabel comes after him and asks if he plans to leave his baggage behind. Locust Trauman turns back and looks at Isabel, who is ready to go with her bags. Locust Trauman says he does not have any baggage. He asks her if he has any, which saddens him. She says he had called her all those names earlier, such as baggage, burden and hindrance. Locust Trauman asks her if she is going to follow him. He asks her what about the academy. She says she is planning to study magic to the limits. She says the history's great mage is in front of her. She asks why she should take anyone else as a teacher in that case. Locust Trauman says she is going to regret it. Isabel yawns and says she does not repeat herself. She says she will follow him even if he thinks he will walk a highway down to hell. She says she will follow him to the end of the world. Locust Trauman smiles and releases a deep breath. He sees her walking ahead of him. He starts walking with her. The scene shifts to Michiel Bleak's room. Patrick tells Michiel Bleak that Frey got close to Lord Peruan-jun. He adds they are closer than common friends. He tells Michiel Bleak that Lord Peruan-jun announced at the party that Frey Blake is the most valuable guest. Michiel Bleak says so what? Patrick says he thought he should inform the floor master about this. Michiel Bleak asks why he should be interested in with whom his little brother is getting close. Patrick gets nervous and says he did not mean that. Michiel asks Patrick to leave. Then he starts to think about it. He says this is the unexpected news that Lord Peruan-jun considers Frey a good friend. He asks why people say even trash can sometimes have valuable moments. He asks Heinz Bleak what he thinks about this. Heinz Bleak says he is not interested. He says it is a matter of no surprise if they get close and study in the same academy. Michiel Bleak says he knew he would say that. He thinks he should inform his father about that. He says he can use him to their advantage. Heinz Bleak looks at his brother going out. He stays silent and starts to think something about something. Isabel takes a card up. She asks Locust Trauman what this is. Locust Trauman says he has received it from Duke Shepard. He says it is a sort of qualification I need to be able to take the entrance test for his circle. Isabel says it is an organization created to fix the world. She says the best plan would be to join the circle to learn more information about demigods. She says he has never heard of the name demigod before. She says she heard about the 5 heroes for the first time. She says we were only taught that they were the great leader who tried to rectify the world. She says it is different to learn that they fought against an enemy like a demigod. She says she would think it was a conspiracy theory if it were not from him. Locust Trauman says the scariest type of domination is the domination visible to the eyes. He says those under that kind of rule cannot think for themselves and plan their future. He says they only let time pass and eat what is given to them. He says they get drunk on the feeling of satisfaction and achievement. Locust Trauman says they become slaves without knowing that someone controls them. He concludes that is the condition of humanity. He leans toward Isabel and says she cannot say he never lost to the demigod. He says he is in the process of winning. Isabel laughs at this. They reach the magic tower. Isabel says it is his first time at a magic tower. She says this is an overbearing sensation. Locust Trauman says half a year is left, and then he can join the circle. He says he has to learn how to control the frozen river energy by then. He says he needs to train until he reaches his prime strength. He says this is nostalgic. He thinks back then he kept himself immersed in the magic books at a magic tower. They hear footsteps. They look back and see dark elves. Locust Trauman feels shocked to see dark elves. Isabel asks Locust Trauman why he is surprised. She says the species of dark elves are free to travel among the humans. Locust Trauman says he has read something like this in the academy. He says, but it is pretty surprising to see them in person. He says this could never have happened 4,000 years ago. He says he remembers reading that the elves can ultimately unify. He says the whole jungle far in the north is their territory. He keeps looking at the black elves. The magic tower is a well-built building. They enter the magic tower. There are a lot of magicians practicing magic in the magic tower. There is a spacious hall for magic practice. Isabel practiced the battling technique. She says she has gotten used to the battling technique. Locust Trauman is also busy in training. He seems pretty absorbed in practice. Isabel looks at him. Meanwhile, a man comes to her. He asks her if the boy is his friend. The man says there are rumors about him roaming about in the tower. Isabel looks at the man. The man says her friend keeps doing a weird dance the whole day and spends the entire night in the library reading books. He tells her that people say a very odd and bizarre man entered the tower. Isabel laughs and says it looks bizarre at the beginning. She thinks now that she has learned the battling technique and can read the flow of Kai, she can see them. She says she can see the incredible moves hidden in his dance. She says he attacks at a speed that cannot be noticed with the naked eye and returns to the initial position. She says that is why it looks like a flowy dance. She says that it is an astonishingly high-level martial art. The man says he gets more and more confused by his dance. The man gets hit by a dark elf. He falls to the ground and asks for mercy. The dark elf says he is a weak human. The dark elf releases a heavy breath. Another dark elf tells him it is disrespectful to say this to someone who admitted his defeat. The dark elf calls him Liamson and asks if it is the warrior attitude he is bragging about. Liamson says no, it is not. The master gives the human his hand and helps him stand up. The master of elves looks at Locust Traman and notices his practice movements. Isabel looks at the elf and wonders if he is the same elf they saw outside the tower standing at the front of the group. Liamson comes close to Locust Traman and asks him if he is a magic warrior. Locust Traman replies he is a magician. Liamson asks him if it is genuine. Liamson thinks these are different from the movements of a magician that he is practicing. Liamson calls him human. Locust Traman asks him to call him Frey. The dark elf says he is Liamson. Limson asks Locust Traman to fight with him.